Well, good morning, folks. Hopefully you can hear me on this mic. It's great to be here in Colorado. It's great to be here with our National Guard. And what a fitting time when you talk about always ready and always there for our Guard, because they are. And I contend that motto and what you do will be more important now than it's ever been in our nation's history. Because we live in a pretty crazy time, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, I think, the world dynamics that we live in. And I'm going to try and frame the discussion across threats, strategy, our concepts of operation, our force design, requirements, and ultimately how do we pull it all together to build the capability that we need as a nation. And you all played a critical role. As Don just told you, it's great to see him. We went to Capstone together. What he didn't tell you is on my second day at Capstone, I don't know if it was him or General Jack Weinstein, but I fell and broke my hand and had to run with these guys with a broken arm the rest of the time at Capstone. It's great to see my neighbors, Dan Hokanson and General Rice. They live on both sides of me, and who knew we'd have to get here to Colorado to see each other to bring the neighborhood back together. I'm going to let you into a little secret, though, as we start talking today. Does anybody know the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, one of his favorite things in the world? Don't tell anybody, it's a secret. Slide, please. He's a big Tom Hanks fan. He's a big Castaway fan. As a matter of fact, he gave me that, because that way he can sit in his office and yell, "Wilson!" Does anybody remember what happens to Wilson? Yeah, he drowns, right? And I'm hoping that doesn't happen to me here, right? So let me tell you what the job of a vice chief is, right? I'm kind of like that Wilson, right? I follow the chief around, I bounce from meeting to meeting, and I spend a lot of time in 3 big meetings that I attend on a weekly basis. One's called the DMAG, the Deputies Management Action Group, where we get together with the vice chairman and the DepSecDef, and we talk about things, things like what does winning look like against peer competitors? What is the theory for victory, and what would the force look like that makes that? I get to spend some time with all the other vice chiefs and General Hokanson as a member of the JROC. And the JROC, Joint Requirements Oversight Council, comes up with the joint requirements for capability that we're going to bring. And I can spend some time talking about that. How do we do that faster? But that group gets together to define the joint warfighting requirements. And then I sometimes sit in for the chief in the tank. And in the tank with the chairman and the other service chiefs, where we talk about, I'm going to use just general term, very frankly, about warfighting, and it covers everything from current operations today to what do we need to be doing in the future. And it's pretty amazing to be able to sit in the tank and have those discussions. See, most of the service chiefs, and I know that you talked to General McConville when he was here, they wear 3 hats, right? So they wear one hat as a service chief, that you do the organize, train, and equip and develop the service. Another hat they wear our chief wears, is his international air chief. And so our chief just got back in late August. He spent a couple weeks in the Pacific meeting with some key allies and partners like Vietnam and the Philippines and Australia. Last week we met with the Israeli air chief in DC, and so he spends a significant amount of time working with our international partners. And I think all the service chiefs do that. And the third hat they wear is a hat as a member of the JCS, and they provide best military advice to the chairman and the SecDef to be able to advise the president. So again, it's not surprising when I got up this morning and I got a text that General Lynn Gale, who had been here yesterday, flew home last night because he was meeting with the president as they decide what happens with Dorian and where it's going and what the impacts will be. Right. So those are the hats that the service chief will wear, and I kind of fill in the gap there to try and help the chief along the way. And as a chief, you'll hear him talk a lot about is in every challenge there's an opportunity. And so let me start framing some of the challenges that I see, and then some of the opportunities that we have. So next slide, please. Let me zoom way out, right, and talk about this uber complex world that we live in now. And it's changing on a pace and scale that I think is unprecedented in our history. And you see it. You see it happening politically. You see it happening economically. You see it happening socially. and you see it happening technologically. And you can take any one of those, it would make things hard, but when you bring all four of those, I call the quadruple convergence, it makes for uber disruptive change that you're sitting right in the middle of. All right, let me just pull a hand here. Show of hands, does anybody in this room not have a smartphone? Anybody? I don't see any. Oh, there's one? Must be Army. Sorry. A little too close to home. All right. They didn't exist 12 years ago. Smartphones didn't exist. Half of the world now has a smartphone. Right? Hard to believe that the population of the planet has tripled in the last 70 years. Right? So the founding of our Air Force, the population of the Earth was 2.4 billion. Now it sits about 7.6 billion. Tripled in 70 years. Right? Lots of good things happening, right? You can see lots of people now out of poverty. We've got a lot more people that have been educated. We got people are living longer. There's a lot of good things happening. But I also contend there's a huge amount of challenges happening across that globe. Again, let's just take one socially. You see the impact of social media? I'm going to call that a social and technology piece. Is it information now? Is it real? Is it not? And how are people using information to change the way people think? Let's take another social piece. If you saw the migration of people out of the Middle East due to the Syrian conflict, and now they impacted Europe, and the changes that went on throughout Europe, I contend that will pale in comparison over the next decade or two as the population of sub-Saharan Africa, which has now been growing at 6 times the global average, is those people now have to find jobs and work for their families. And if they don't live in a place with good governance and good jobs, I contend they're going to migrate to where they are. And the closest place will be Europe. Talk about challenges, that will be a ginormous challenge. This tech piece that I talked about, it's not the purview of the United States, it's purview of global. And you look at what's happening and how people are adapting technology and changing it in ways that we thought it's hard to comprehend. Right? I could spend a lot of time talking about ISIS and what they're doing, how they're modifying commercial bot Chinese DJI Phantom 4 drones, and what they're doing with those and the impact that we're seeing across the battlefield. Uber disruptive change that we sit right in the middle of. Slide, please. Let me talk about one of those places, right? As we align the NDS, and I know everybody here has read it, but we were back in the great power competition game. Right? And I would argue the pacing challenge is China for lots of reasons. In China, we've been seeing lots of change happening and lots of change on, again, pace and scale that's hard to comprehend. If you look at the cover of these magazines, you'd think they'd already won. I contend they haven't. But here's our key takeaway for today. They could. It's existential. They could win. And here's where I need your help. I need your help going back to our communities, to the 54 different areas, to the places that we live, and to talk to the members of our community about the threat and the sense of urgency that we need to get as a nation because of it. So let me give you just one area to scope this. Right? So today we'd say our economy is doing pretty good and that we have the largest economy in the world. And our economy grew at about 3% last year. There's others who would argue that China's economy is actually bigger. It's bigger if you count purchasing power parity. We could argue about it, but they're close in size, nearly 1-to-1. They had the lowest growth rate that they've had in 38 years, 6.8%. And again, we had 3. Their population is 4.2 times the size of the United States. And last year, they graduated 8 times the number of STEM graduates that we did, 8x. So I call that the 15-to-1 problem, 8, 4, 2, 1. Let's just frame the competition right up front with China. Let me ask another thing about China that's different, right? I call this a culture, a battle of cultures, where we believe in a liberal democracy and a free and open society, and they don't. But they do believe in the control of the state. And when they put out their 2049 plan that says they will be the dominant military on the planet by 2035 and the dominant country in the world by 2049, they have a plan and they're moving on it, and they're moving on it as a whole of government. And you can read about their mega projects, whether it be space, whether it be cyber, whether it be hypersonics, whether it be quantum, whether it be AI, they are all in to win. In another area that's different than ours, they don't care how they win. Right? Taking your idea is not only expected, that's exactly what we expect. Right? I don't care where the idea comes from. Stealing is perfectly fine. Right? We're in to win. So I just tell people, I just want to frame the competition that we face as a nation, and the piece behind that is we got to develop, again, a sense of urgency behind it, and we have to stop thinking like we're Goliath and start thinking now like we're David. Fight's on. Okay, slide, please. Don teed up this story, and I tell people we think differently depending on the period of time that we live in. I know this guy thought completely different on December 8th, 1941 than he did on December 6th, 1941. He gave a speech where he stood up in front of folks and he said, "Hey, standing before you is an authority on disaster. I am an expert in failure. I am one of the few Americans who has lost a war. I've seen the American way of life change overnight. I've seen generations of Army schooling and history and turn overnight into tired, dirty, beaten men just trying to walk to the next water hole." And he was a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. As Don said, he was a West Point class of 24, and my father was a West Point class of 1953. My uncle was a class of 1950 from West Point. He also talked about that, I thought was a pretty important statement there at the end about how the future of conflict will change, and he wrote that in 1950, where we measure time now in minutes, because in a future war that time will not be available. Hence, we have to be ready. Hence, what you all do, being ready all the time, is really important for us as a nation. Slide, please. Let me talk before we hit this. There'll be about a 1-minute video that'll play that General Goldfein will talk up something really important for the joint team moving forward. But as we look through the theory of victory, and what does the theory of victory look like in future conflict, it goes something like this. We're congealing around this thought, right? But I have to have forward deployed forces, enough, credible, to be able to blunt an attack. Right? I have to own the ultimate high ground. I have to have the communication networks that run through a multi-domain command and control organization that then can converge effects at speed, range, and distance to provide an adversary dilemmas that they can't keep up with. So when you hear General McConville talking about multi-domain operations, that's the same thing our Chief of Staff is talking about, is multi-domain operations, but it lives inside of that, this multi-domain command and control. To be able to sense the globe, to be able to take the communication, resilient communication across, get away from platforms to a multi-domain C2 organization, again, that can provide effects to air, land, sea, cyber, space, from below the surface, underwater, all the way to geosynchronous orbit on a pace and scale that our adversaries can't keep up with. So if we could roll, we got about a 1-minute video here from the Chief that talks about multi-domain operations.
Multi-domain command and control is the most critical element of achieving future victory through multi-domain operations. Our platforms today already work across domains. We have weapons and aircraft that are guided by space, and ground units that are networked to air platforms. What I'm talking about is a fully networked force where each platform's sensors and operators are connected, not by point-to-point circuits, but in a mesh network that is highly resilient and self-healing. And they're not just connected either. They're part of a command and control system that automatically pairs the right sensors to the right targets, fusing data from all platforms and sensors, identifying and refining targets automatically, and allocating weapons to targets, allowing us to converge effects in a synchronized and simultaneous manner. Multi-domain operations, using dominance in one domain or many, blending a few capabilities or many to produce multiple dilemmas for our adversaries. Fight's on.
Slide, please. So what the chief would say is we're going to get out of the platform-centric warfare and get into the network-centric warfare. Key in that will be cyber and space, to be able to build that. Because if we lose either one of those, the joint force loses. So as we're looking through, and we're talking a lot about it in the tank, this joint force design, what does it look like? Right? In the Air Force, we're talking about the Air Force we need, but I contend it's across all the services, and it's here in the National Guard. What is the force that we need to fight the fight that we need in the future? Right, so as important as the force that we need, we also need to think is, what is the force we don't need? Right? And the force we don't need is if it doesn't connect, if it doesn't share, and it doesn't learn, it needs to go into this pile that says that's the force we don't need. If it doesn't make us faster or more lethal, it goes in this force that says that's the force we don't need. Because warfare of the future is going to be all about connecting, getting out of the platform-centric into the network-centric warfare. Connecting, sharing information, learning why artificial intelligence is so important moving forward. Those will be key. Slide, please. Let's talk about a couple of those areas. I know there's folks here from Texas, my home state there. And I also know you're dealing with the largest ransomware attack in our nation's history. 23 separate organizations impacted across multiple counties. And we see the impact, whether government emails down, people having to go back to the days where I can't process via the net. I've got to then write checks. How many people here have written a check recently? Well, they're writing checks in Texas right now, right? Because they have to. Right? Governor Abbott declared it a level 2 threat, brought in the Texas National Guard to be able to help out through this. So here's what I call ransomware. Ransomware is pirates, right? They're going to try and extract the fee so that you can get your service back. What do you think is going to happen in a pure competition, in a pure fight, when a pure adversary affects our cyber underpinnings? There's not going to be a ransom note that says, give me $1 million and you get your stuff back. Right? Cyber is going to be increasingly important to all of the joint force moving forward. I was just out in San Antonio talking to our cyber wings. And we're looking at how do we combine as we do reorganization in our Air Force, 24th and 25th Air Force, into an information warfare numbered Air Force. It'll be 16th Air Force. We've reorganized on the headquarters Air Force, the A2 and the A6, and put them together, again, because we think this cyber and information warfare is merging together to be able to control information. And I know the Army's doing the same thing. They're moving out in that direction. But the bottom line to this is, again, if you're in the cyber business, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us as a nation in that endeavor as we think through the implications of cyber. Slide, please. Anybody know what the picture of this is? It's a picture of the dark side of the moon, where there's a Chinese rover there. China was the first nation to do that. As a matter of fact, last year, China launched 38 space launches. We launched 34. China made space one of their mega projects. We know what they're doing in space. Right? We're adjusting as a result of this new environment that we live in. Last Thursday, the president stood up the new newest United States Combatant Command, United States Space Comm, the 11th, led by General J. Raymond. Space is increasingly important to the Joint Force. My bottom line takeaway, drop mic, is if we lose space, the Joint Force loses. And so we are moving out in a big way against space, and again, the Guard will be critical to the space mission. Today, about 40% of our offensive space capability comes from the Guard. Right? We cannot do the mission without the Guard. It will be increasingly important in the future as we stand up a new service. So as you think through, just like we have an Army, a Navy, an Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, there will be a Space Force. Congress has got legislation, 2 different versions between the House and the Senate, but I'm confident they will reconcile, and we will have a Space Force starting this next year. And there will be a lot of important missions in that Space Force for our National Guard. But again, I look at the threat, and I look at what they're doing, and I see the areas that they're moving out on. And when I showed up in my job in the summer of 2016, I got word about what the Chinese were doing with a quantum satellite. And I asked our intel folks and said, what does this mean? Don't worry, sir. I said, do we have one? Well, no, sir, we don't. The next year, that same quantum satellite had done quantum teleportation and quantum entanglement from distance, and President Xi made a phone call from Austria to Beijing via that quantum satellite. I sent a note to our intel guys and said, so folks, what does this mean now that they've done that? And they're like, that's a big deal, sir. And that's the competition. We just have to understand it and use what we do best as a nation to win. Slide. And part of what we do best is right here. This is our asymmetric advantage. Right? Our people. And we have to unleash our young people. We gotta get rid of that frozen middle that stops these amazing ideas from becoming reality. So if you look at the bottom right picture over there, that's Captain Mike Kanan. Arguably one of the smartest people in our Air Force, and I'd say in the Department of Defense on algorithmic warfare. We're doing a tech accelerator with MIT. He's going to be one of the guys that helps lead that effort. He is wickedly smart. He's advising the JAIC on what they're doing with this Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, on where we need to be going with artificial intelligence. He's an example of one. Captain Austin above it is one of what I call the great amazing captains. She came to me with an idea about 2 years ago on a tech accelerator that she had well thought out on how do we get after the counter-UAS effort, and she is absolutely remarkable. She's so good that Dr. Roper snagged her, and now he's working directly for her in AQX and some of the big projects on acquisition, and how do we really reform how we do acquisition. She's awesome. And our first lieutenant, Nadu, is the guy talking to me, and this was just last week. He's out of the 33rd Network Warfare Squadron in San Antonio. And he told me about a really hard problem, and he went to his boss, like any lieutenant does, with a bunch of smack talk, and says, hey, boss, give me 5 people in 5 days, and I'll solve this really hard problem. Came back at the end of 5 days and said, hey, boss, I've scoped the problem. It's a lot harder than I thought it was. I need 10 people in 45 days. So his boss gave him, squadron commander gave him 10 people in 45 days. Came back at the end of that and said, hey, boss, struck out again. We looked at it and we realized how big a problem this is that we've got to get after. And so I need 20 people in 90 days. I have to bring in the whole intelligence community. I got to bring in a bunch of folks from the interagency. This is how hard and complicated this problem is. At the end of 90 days, he came back and said, hey, boss, strike 3, we didn't get it again. But I think we're on the right path. If you give me a little bit more time, I think I can show you some results. And about 20 days after that, he did. He came into his boss and said, we don't have total victory, but this really, really hard problem that we talked to you about, we got our first success. Here's what I loved about it. I loved the lieutenant with a sense of urgency. I loved the lieutenant who'd framed the problem. I loved the lieutenant who'd built a team, in this case, a joint interagency team. I loved the lieutenant who failed 3 times and he wouldn't quit. I loved the fact that the squadron commander encouraged and let him fail until they didn't. And I contend that's what winning looks like. Right? Empowering our airmen, as our chief says, go long, I have your back, I trust you, don't wait for me. We need to take advantage of that. That's our opportunity. Slide, please. That's my last slide. So I contend I could have showed a picture here of the equivalent on the Army side. This is our BMT graduation. Again, this is the weapon system that's going to beat China and Russia and North Korea and Iran right here. This is our most important weapon system. And in 10 years from now, those young airman basics will be tech sergeants. The lieutenants coming out of ROTC and OTS in the academy will be majors. They'll be the crusty ones, the iron majors and the senior NCOs dealing with the world that they have in 10 years from now. So our job is to unleash those airmen, to provide them the right education, the right training, the right experiences, the right development, to make sure that they are prepared and ready. We need to make sure they understand the urgency of the situation in the world that they live in and the pace at which it's changing. And we need to provide them the tools and the capability to be able to deter competition, but if deterrence fails, to be able to fight and win. It doesn't matter. It's all our components. It's active guard, reserve, civilians. We have to all be in. And again, as I started off the conversation today, is never before in our nation's history will our nation rely on our National Guard like they do today. I contend you'll be more important in the future than you are now. And again, today, I'd say our National Guard is incredibly important to everything that we do as a joint force and a joint team. Okay, let me stop and see what's on your mind, what questions you have for me, and then I realize I'm the last thing between you and lunch. Right? But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you all. Got one over here. Howdy.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Sanders, Arkansas National Guard. In your own words, other than funding, what would you say is the greatest challenge the Department of Defense has to overcome in terms of fielding and realizing some of these new technologies that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So we have to bring these capabilities forward at the speed of relevance. Let me use a segue. I'll go back to space. On May 25th, 1961, President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon and back. In July of 1969, we went to the moon and came back. 8 years. In 8 years, we did 36 space launches. We went through the Mercury, the Gemini, and the Apollo programs. Apollo 11 landed on the moon and came back. We had some epic failures along the way. We lost Apollo 1 with some amazing astronauts. We didn't stop. We built the largest rocket in the history of the world. We built the largest structures to support that rocket. We did it in 8 years. Today, we often can't get the paperwork done in 8 years. Right? So we have to be able to build capability at the speed of relevance. Right? We have to take what commercial has available today and adopt it into what we're doing. So today's fight is not about who has the most advanced technology, it's who can take the technology and the capability and adapt it the quickest. Right? So I go around saying speed wins. I can't take 10 years to develop capability and put it in your hands. Right? Because it becomes irrelevant before I even get it fielded. So we're all on a warpath inside the Pentagon on how do we do this whole capability development from the front end side of requirements to the acquisition, to the testing, to the fielding, and I got to take what normally takes that long and I got to put it in that long, and then put it in the hands of the people who can do something with it. So a lot of time being spent on capability development and how do we get it faster. If Dr. Roper were here, he'd tell you he went to a pitch day in New York City and had a bunch of small businesses come in, and that day, the longest it took to put people on contract was 15 minutes. And he put people on small business award contract, the quickest was 3 minutes. One of those guys in the small business who had never done business with the Department of Defense before came forward and said, this is in New York City. He goes, holy cow, it is quicker and easier to do business with the United States Air Force than it is to get a beer in New York City, right? That's what we need to make how easy and how we do business with us, with industry and our industry partners. We've got to make that real. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
General Wilson, thanks for being here. My name is Derek Day. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel from the great state of New Hampshire. I'm the executive director of the New Hampshire National Guard Association, the former squadron commander of a TFI unit. All the guest speakers here at your level have been talking about innovation, integration, doing things better, faster, smarter, cheaper. PEAS was selected due to a lot of hard work by many people to field KC-46 concurrently with the active duty Air Force. And currently right now, I see an impending failure with that fielding, and it's because AMC is not allocating training slots for our airmen to go through KC-46 school at Altus. When we had our first SATAF, I was at the table, and I was shown a spreadsheet of the training throughput for Altus for the schoolhouse for KC-46. And I'm not a rocket scientist, but I can do basic math, and it clearly became evident to me that there were no PEAS airmen accounted for in that first spreadsheet. So I identified to Derek Strunk, one of the big brains at the table, that flaw 4 years ago. And to date, we still have very few airmen trained, only a few in the pipeline. And if we're going to be equal team members, then there has to be equal training and throughput at Altus. I'll follow on with that is that I'm an Air Force pilot, and I'm retired, and I'm also an airline pilot. I've been type rated on the 707, 737, 757, 767, 777, the Airbus A300, and the McDonnell Douglas DC-9. I know a little bit about training. We are doing it inefficiently at the AMC level. We can shorten the time our airmen in training, and we can do it much more productively, sir. And I ask for your input at your level to help with that process.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. I tell you, we want to welcome anybody and everybody to the team who have new ways of training. Right? I've got an effort underway in Austin, Texas, through AFWorks of Pilot Training Next. Second class is graduating, and we're seeing some remarkable increases on how fast we can train people and how people learn differently and do differently. So we're trying to scale that. We're trying to scale that across our Air Force. And so if there's ideas on training differently, I'm going to tell you, you'll push on an open door because we're all ears on how to do that. And I'll go back and...
We presented a white paper and was rejected.
Who presented the white paper?
PEAS did on perhaps our great friends in the state of Rhode Island. Yeah. They currently run a schoolhouse for the C-130J, and there's no reason we couldn't do the same thing for KC-46 at PEAS.
Yeah, well, we'll go back and take a look at it. Yeah, thank you for your input, yeah.
Yes, sir, General Wilson, thanks so much for your challenging thoughts. Greg Schwab, Iowa. I would appreciate your input update on another one of our focus areas. Tell me how the squadron revitalization is going, maybe a reflection on that little experiment where we're running with groups, in your opinion.
Yeah, let me give a couple pieces. So we've got the efforts underway in squadron revitalization, one of which was to put admin support back in the squadrons to be able to help people with the admin burden. And we got probably half of the squadrons that have got that right now, with the other half being programmed and flown in, will flow in this following year. We tried to get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy in your way, and we're not all the way through our AFI redo, but we've got a whole bunch that have been redone. And so again, right now we think that there's been a real admin burden that's hurting the squadron. How do we do that? The other thing we're trying to do is make sure that we have, the quality of life and quality of service, because we're going to look at how we bring airmen in with their families, and it has to be a place that they like going to work, that their families enjoy it, But if I got them on a purse tempo and an ops tempo that they're never there, then they're going to vote with their feet. And so how do we reduce the ops tempo? Part of that is come out of the Middle East in bigger numbers and to be able to support that and then provide them the quality of life and quality of service back at the unit level. We still have lots of work to do that. The other part I would say that I think I'm encouraged about is what I see is squadron commanders who have taken to heart the chief's motto. And he said, hey, don't wait for me, go along, I trust you. And so when a wing commander heard the chief a few years ago, we went back to his wing and said, hey, listen to the chief, and these are the things we're no longer going to do because it doesn't make sense. And he actually put that out on a piece of paper, sent it out to his wing, and it made its way back to the air staff. When the chief saw it, it was pretty bold, right? I was looking at it, I was like, wow, this guy is moving out. Chief reads it and goes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. He had his exec tee up an email to all the wing commanders in the Air Force, attached that and said, this is an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Go along, I trust you, I have your back. You know the mission better than anybody. I trust you to make the right decisions. And so when we have wings doing that and squadrons doing that, I'm encouraged that we're on the positive path. We have a lot to do on the resourcing side to get the squadron the people they need. And we're on an effort to grow our Air Force. We've said we're too small for what our nation needs. Starts with people, so we're growing our people across all three components, putting those people back in the squadron, trying to empower the squadron commanders, and trying to get the right balance with the personal and professional life. So are we there? No. But I think the trend lines are in positive directions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Morning, sir. Lieutenant Henderson, Colorado National Guard. I'm a full-time engineer at Lockheed Martin in the Hypersonics program, so we're go fast, where the Air Force is our customer.
Yeah.
Could you speak more to the higher level innovation on how to rapidly develop and field the technology, especially as we look at competition with near peers?
Yeah.
You had mentioned the startup accelerators. Are there any other novel ideas that are brought in to rapidly field that technology?
Yeah. So let me give you a couple thoughts. So I went out to see Lockheed in 2016, 2017 into their Palmdale Skunk Work guys, and what the work they're doing on hypersonics is fantastic, right? And they talked to me about being able to deliver capability in 2028, and I said, you mean 2018, right? And they said, no, this is, we're doing some cutting edge stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that, but our adversary is moving out, right? If you go to China today, you'll find that if you were a graduate of one of the great Colorado institutions, at UC Boulder or Colorado School of Mines, and you did work in aerospace engineering and maybe hypersonics work paper, you'd get invited to Beijing to present your paper to the International Hypersonic Conference. And while there, they'd show you one of 60 new facilities that they built in the last 10 years and say, take your pick at the work you want to do here, and we'll pay you 5 to 10x what you'd make in the United States doing your hypersonic research at one of our state-of-the-art facilities. Right? Again, I want to frame that competition because that's exactly what they're doing. Right? So our industry partners are incredible, right? But we dribbled money at hypersonics. I told people, we were doing hypersonics before hypersonics was cool, right? We were doing hypersonics in the 60s, right? And then we stopped. And our adversaries looked at that and talked about what hypersonics brings to them, and they've now gone all in as a nation to be able to do hypersonics. So as I talk to Congress, I say, again, frame the competition. That's what they're doing. We can't do things that slow us down, right? Having an on-time budget is really important. Not having bureaucracy that slows that down is important, right? How do we do, again, from the requirements, the acquisition, to the testing, to the fielding, and how do we compress that timeline, and how do we look at every opportunity to do that, and how do we spirally develop in terms of technologies so I don't have to wait 15 years for uber alles, be-all, end-all weapon. What's good enough for now, and as I develop new technology on seekers and warheads and other capability, I will put it in this system, but I can't wait for the perfect weapon system 12 years from now because we'll lose. Right, so that's kind of our message we're telling Congress. You certainly have a big advocate on hypersonics with Dr. Griffin, or in OSD, who's been pounding his shoe about hypersonics, and we're trying to get all of our teammates, all of industry, and all of our services aligned on how do we do it faster.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And sir, we have time for these last two questions, if
Okay.
that's good for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. I'm Dylan Todd from Montana, Lieutenant Todd. My brother was doing research on gallium nitride, and the research that he was doing was specifically exploited by China, kind of what you're talking about, and specifically by a company named Huawei. I was wondering what we're doing as a nation to combat the theft of technology and the theft of research that Americans are doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, you kind of explicitly called it out, so I was wondering if there's anything that we're doing to combat that.
Yeah, that's certainly a big topic of discussion in the interagency and with the president on what we do as technology is being stole from us. Part of our deal is we got to educate all of our partners out there, our industry partners, when they're cleared defense contractors, because they've been getting siphoned blind by the Chinese. It shouldn't, you know, if you look at the new Chinese J-20 and look at some of our 5th generation airplanes and realize, boy, they're very similar in shape, very similar across all the things that they're doing. I wonder how that happened. It just could be a coincidence, right? Yeah, not. Right. Let's take, I'll use a little one I talk about. You mentioned Huawei and what they're doing and 5G and other things. Anybody familiar here with an app called WeChat? WeChat, anybody? A couple people? Well, here's a crazy thing about WeChat, right? WeChat is actually used by 1/3 of the world's internet users. 1/3. It's a little over 1.2 billion people use this app. And this app is, I'm going to say, as the Chinese, as we did Google, they did Beidou. As we did Amazon, they did Alibaba. As we did Uber, they did Didi. And just go down the list, they took all those, and then they took all those apps and they put all of them into one, called a super app. And inside the super app of WeChat, you can FaceTime and Skype and Yelp and Uber and Google, and all your electronic payments go through that app. And they had a pretty slick way they rolled it out. And it's all very cool, and anybody who's seen the app go, that's a really an impressive app. They basically stole every piece of it, optimized it for China, and made it theirs. And of the 1.2 billion users who use it, China gets all the data. Chinese government gets all the data. So they know where you're going, who you're talking to, what you're spending, who you're spending your money with. And we would have huge privacy concerns. They don't have any of those in China. In fact, they use those to make a social score, right? So this theft of technology is a big item of discussion in the interagency. It's been happening by China. It's part of the reason that I think the administration has been so vocal about some of the challenges we're faced with China, because we've been literally stolen blind by them. But thank you.
Thank you, sir.
General, thank you very much for your time. Hank Harder from the state of Vermont. This is a big topic, and I know we're running short on time, but just want to get your perspective from your level on climate change and the threat to our defense of our nation, and what your thoughts on climate change are.
Well, my thoughts are, we have seen some pretty big storms hit in the last few years that have impacted Air Force bases, right? So last year we had Hurricane Michael that hit Tyndall Air Force Base. If people aren't tracking, we were actually talking about it before we came on. The eye wall of that Cat 5 storm literally went directly over the runway at Tyndall. So that on this side of the runway, all the trees were snapped off at about 8 foot high, and they were facing that direction. And on this side of the runway, all the trees are snapped off at 8 foot, going this direction because the eye wall went over the base. It did a little over $5 billion of damage to Tyndall Air Force Base. 95% of the structures there were either damaged or destroyed. And so Tyndall is now going to be an opportunity for us to build the base of the future. Not long after that, we had issues with the flooding at Offutt Air Force Base. It did some significant damage to Offutt Air Force Base. So we've had weather. We need to treat weather like we would any type of enemy and adversary, and understand it and be able to protect against it. From how we design our structures or where they're put, how we base things, how we think through the problem. And, as we approach hurricane season down there now, should we be moving things out on a rotational basis, so that all the assets aren't located at single point failure installations. And then again, I could go through wildfires that we've seen that have happened, and we just know that weather now is impacting lots of our installations across the United States. The Navy had about $5 billion of damage at China Lake via earthquakes. And as we're staring at a Cat 5 storm that's headed towards the Bahamas as we speak, and where it will go, Florida or turn north, to be told, there will be some significant impacts due to weather. And so again, weather is factoring into lots of our decisions going forward on where we base things, the structures that we build there, did we design them properly? And we're trying to learn a lot of the lessons from Michael and apply those moving forward to the design of bases of the future. But it's a significant impact, and we, the United States Air Force, saw in excess of $6 billion of damages this last year due to nature and the impacts. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, General. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
So that was awesome. Thank you very much. So we have a small token of our appreciation. This is a belt buckle for the 141st Conference of NGAUS. It has our iconic Minuteman, our symbol, and on behalf of the association and our host states, Wyoming and Colorado, we'd like you to have that
Thank you, Don.
in memory of this. Thank you so much for your leadership, sir. Great
to see you.
job.
Thank you.
Will the Sergeant of Arms please escort our distinguished visitor from the stage? Thank you.